The day she moved out, it rained like the sky was ashamed of watching us fall apart. I stood in the driveway, arms crossed, while the movers loaded the last of her things into a sleek black truck. Everything was labeled neatly: kitchen, bedroom, office. As if this were just another business transaction. And in a way it was. By that point, our marriage had become more about property than partnership. Love had long since left the building. Caroline didn't look back. Not once. She wore her usual calm. High heels, red coat, chin up, no smudged mascara, no shaking hands. You would never know that 2 weeks earlier we'd screamed ourselves hoarse over coffee mugs and broken memories. "I'll leave the keys on the counter," she had said the night before, as if it were the end of a lease, not a life. She got the house, the car, most of the friends, because they always picked the one with better social currency. What did I get? Well, at the time, nothing. That's what it felt like. But I was wrong. So wrong. Because what I took, what I held on to, was something she didn't even notice she lost, and it changed everything. We met at a gallery opening in New York. She was magnetic, smart, sharp, with an edge that could cut glass. I was the quieter type, more observant, a bit lost in the noise of the city. She pulled me out of it. We dated for 2 years before getting married in a courthouse with no guests. She liked things fast, efficient, practical. Love was never flowers and long letters with Caroline. It was strategic, smart. "You don't waste time on what you already know," she used to say. And she knew we were meant to be. So we went with it. The first few years were good, stable. She worked in corporate law, and I ran a small photography studio that I had built from scratch. We lived in a loft apartment downtown. Our life looked perfect on paper, but paper burns easily. The cracks began with silence, not yelling, not cheating, just absence. She'd come home late, eat standing at the counter, scroll through emails during dinner. I tried to talk, but she'd always nod distractedly. "Later," she'd say, but later never came. One night I found myself photographing an abandoned church for a client and realized I felt more at peace there, in the echo of crumbling walls and broken pews, than in my own home. That was the first warning sign. The second came in the form of Ethan. Ethan was an old friend, a good one. We'd been college roommates, lost touch for a while, and reconnected when he moved back to the city. Caroline didn't like him. She said he was too artsy, too emotional. But Ethan listened. He saw me in ways Caroline had stopped doing years ago. He wasn't the one who broke us, though. She was. Because when she told me she wanted a divorce, she didn't cry. She didn't falter. She simply handed me a printed list of items she wanted to claim. Her email subject line had read, "Division of Assets, Proposal." Like I was just another file on her desk. I fought it. Of course I did. Hired a lawyer. I showed up in court. But she came with documentation, a team, a strategy. She knew how to win, and I was too shocked, too hurt to play her game. So she won. She took the house we picked out together, the car I had restored by hand, even the goddamn espresso machine I gifted her on our first anniversary. But what broke me wasn't the things. It was the people. Our friends, my friends, chose her. Maybe it was because she was more charismatic. Maybe because she stayed in the social circles while I retreated. Maybe they just didn't want to pick sides, so they picked convenience. Was left with Ethan. And silence. "You need to do something," Ethan said one night after I hadn't left my apartment in 3 days. "Like what?" "She took everything." "No," he said calmly. "She took stuff. Not everything." "What the hell does that even mean?" "It means you're looking at what you lost, but not what you still have." I scoffed. "Like what?" He hesitated. "Like your story. Your heart. Your truth." That night I dug out an old hard drive, one that held every photo I had taken over the past decade. Weddings, portraits, travel, clients, strangers, and her. Caroline's face showed up in so many of them, but it wasn't the smiles I saw. It was the change. The way her eyes stopped crinkling. The way her body language stiffened. Frame by frame, I watched our love die, and I hadn't even noticed at the time. But buried in those files was something else. A folder titled Project Resolve. I had started it years ago, a personal project photographing people going through loss and transformation. Divorces, deaths, recoveries. Each portrait came with a story, a raw and real testimony of what it meant to start over. I had shelved it when work got busy. When Caroline said it wasn't marketable, that it was too depressing. But now, I saw it differently. Now, it felt like a lifeline. I spent the next 2 months reviving Project Resolve. I called old clients, reached out through forums, contacted support groups. People responded. They wanted to be seen, to be heard. I traveled, shot new portraits, recorded their stories, and in telling theirs, I started reclaiming mine. The day I launched the new website, I felt something shift inside me. Not vengeance, not justice. Peace. Because while Caroline had taken the tangible, I had taken back the intangible. I had taken my voice. And that was something she could never replace. The morning after launching the website, I woke to dozens of notifications, emails, messages, interview requests. One comment struck me the most. It read, "I've never felt seen before. Thank you for telling our stories." I sat at the edge of my bed for a long time, phone in hand, heart thumping. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like a shell. I felt useful, and I realized this project, once shelved and forgotten, was now my bridge back to purpose. Caroline had never understood it. To her, feelings were inefficient, stories were indulgent. She once told me, people don't need to share pain, they need to solve it. But the people reaching out to me didn't want solutions. They wanted to be heard. By the end of the week, I had been invited to speak at a local art therapy group. They asked if I could showcase the portraits and maybe share a few stories behind the images. I was nervous, but I agreed. I spent hours curating the presentation. I chose stories of resilience, loss, addiction, and quiet triumphs. I printed each, photo large, framed them with quotes from the subjects, and prepared my talk like it was a court testimony, not to defend myself, but to defend the power of vulnerability. When the night came, the room was filled with people. Many were strangers. Some were people who had seen the project online. A few were featured in the portraits, their faces proud, yet unsure, like stepping into their own power for the first time. I stood in front of them, took a deep breath, and began. This project began during a time when I had lost everything. I said, voice steady but low. My marriage ended, my business stalled, my confidence vanished, and for a while, I believed I was the problem. There were nods in the crowd. But I started looking through my old photographs, portraits of people who had lost more than I ever had, yet they stood tall, and I realized that grief, when told, becomes something else. It becomes a story, and stories, they save lives. I showed them Elise, who had lost her husband in a fire, but found new life in a baking business. I showed them Marco, who spent 6 years in prison and now helped kids in his neighborhood avoid the same fate. I showed them Claire, a cancer survivor who asked me to photograph her with no wig, no makeup. Just me, she said, just as I am. By the time I finished, the room was silent. Then came the applause. Long, rising, honest. I didn't cry, but I felt something deep, something that hummed in my chest. She can have the house, I thought. She can have the car. But this is mine. 2 weeks later, I was contacted by a woman named Dr. Lenora Hayes. She ran a healing arts institute in Oregon and had seen my project online. She invited me to join a traveling exhibit focused on emotional recovery through visual storytelling. It's called The Unseen Journey, she said over the phone. And your work, it belongs there. I paused. I'm honored, but I'm not sure I'm qualified. I'm not a therapist. I'm just a survivor, she cut in. That's qualification enough. I said yes. Preparing for the exhibit took everything I had, not just time or effort, but courage. Because this time, I wasn't just showing others. I was showing me too. At the center of the display, I placed a self-portrait. I had taken it the day after Caroline left. I looked pale, tired, broken. The caption underneath read, "He lost everything. Then he found himself." Opening night in Portland was overwhelming. The gallery was packed. People wept in front of the portraits. Others hugged strangers, told their own stories. There was a tangible shift in the air, like pain being lifted, transformed. Near the end of the night, I stood off to the side, watching it all unfold, when I heard a voice behind me. "Didn't expect to find you here," it said. I turned. It was James. He had been one of our friends, part of the circle that chose Caroline. We hadn't spoken since the divorce. He looked uncomfortable but sincere. "I saw the exhibit trending online," he said. "I came out of curiosity, but, man, this is something else." I nodded. He hesitated. "I'm sorry for how I disappeared back then." "It's all right," I replied, and to my surprise, I meant it. "Caroline, she's doing well, I guess. Fancy new condo, same old parties." I didn't reply. He looked around, then said quietly, "But you're the one who found something real." I stayed with the exhibit for 3 months. We traveled to 5 cities. Each time the response was the same: tears, healing, hope. Eventually, media outlets picked up the story. Articles were written. A publisher reached out offering to turn the project into a coffee table book. I signed the deal. A small advance, but it felt like a fortune. Not because of the money, but because it was proof. My truth mattered. One night back home, I found an email in my inbox. The name stopped me cold. From Caroline Bennett. Subject: "Congratulations." I hovered before clicking. The message was short. "Saw the exhibit online, heard about the book. I underestimated you. I hope you're doing well. See no bitterness." No request, just closure. I didn't reply. Not because I was angry, but because I no longer needed her to see me. I had already seen myself. Later that week, I went to visit Ethan. I brought a bottle of red wine and a printed copy of the book's cover. He smiled when he saw it. "You did it." "No," I said, pouring us both a glass. "We did it." He raised his glass. "To the things they can't take." We clinked, because in the end, Caroline took everything that could be packed, sold, or driven away. But I took something she couldn't touch. I took myself back. And that made me the richest man I know. After the tour ended and the last gallery, lights dimmed, I returned home to a quiet apartment and the sound of rain tapping against the windows. Portland was always gray in winter, and something about that suited me now. Like the skies were learning to grieve and heal alongside me. But something else had changed. For the first time in over a year, I wasn't running from the silence. Wasn't afraid of the stillness. I wasn't checking social media to see who Caroline was with or what new circle of friends I was no longer part of. I was just here, and I was enough. But healing, I would learn, isn't a destination, it's a cycle. Some days you feel like you've climbed Everest. Others, a voicemail can send you tumbling all the way back down. It happened on a Thursday. I was organizing prints for a new commission when I noticed I had 2 missed calls from Ethan, and 1 from a number I didn't recognize. Curious, I played the voicemail. It was Caroline's mother. "Hello, Daniel. I know it's been a long time, but I thought you should know. Caroline's father passed this morning. It was sudden. She's not handling it well." A pause. "She didn't want me to call you, but I think she needs something, or someone. She can't admit she does." Click. I stood frozen. Not because I was still in love with her, but because grief has a strange way of tying us back to people we thought we'd untied ourselves from. Caroline had always been closer to her father than anyone else. He was the one who introduced her to jazz, taught her to play chess, and told her she could be a lawyer when everyone else said modeling was the only path. She adored him. I sat down. It had been a year since we spoke in person. More than that, since we held eye contact without blame laced between us. I didn't know if I wanted to see her again, but I knew what loss felt like, and no matter what she took from me, she didn't deserve to face this alone. I didn't call her. Instead, I sent a single text. I heard, "I'm so sorry, Caroline. If you need anything, I'm here." No response. Hours passed. I went for a walk, made tea, tried to edit some photos, but my mind stayed tangled. Then close to midnight, she replied, "He always liked you better than me. I think that's what hurts the most tonight." I stared at the screen. A flood of memories surged back. Dinners at her parents' house, her dad's boisterous laugh, the way he always asked me about my photography, even when I didn't feel like an artist anymore. He once said, "Caroline might be the lawyer, but you're the storyteller. Don't let her talk you out of your light." I had almost forgotten that. The next day, I found myself standing outside the chapel. It was raining again, of course. Black coats, umbrellas, and the low hum of grief formed the backdrop. I didn't go inside, not yet. I just watched. Caroline stood at the front. She looked older somehow, not in a tired way, but as if life had finally touched her in a place she had spent years guarding. Her usual precision was gone, hair undone, makeup minimal, eyes hollow but clear. When our gaze met, it was like two travelers spotting each other on opposite ends of a long bridge. Neither knew who would step first. She came to me. We stood in silence for what felt like forever. "Finally," she whispered. "I didn't think you'd come," I answered truthfully. "I wasn't sure I should." She nodded, and then, without warning, she leaned into my shoulder and sobbed. Not the polite, composed tears of a woman used to being seen in courtrooms and conferences, but the raw, childlike sobs of someone whose world just shattered. And I held her because sometimes forgiveness doesn't need to be spoken, it just needs to be felt. We didn't talk much that day, but before I left, she handed me something. An envelope. Inside, there were 3 old photographs I had taken of her family on the first Christmas we spent together. She had written on the back of one, "Thank you for capturing us when we still laughed." That night I looked through my archives, hundreds of photos, faces I hadn't seen in years. And then I found it, a candid shot of Caroline and her dad playing chess. She was losing, he was gloating, and both were laughing like the world was simple. I printed it, and the next morning I delivered it to her office. No note, just the photo. Weeks passed. Spring edged into the city. I kept working. Portraits, talks, a few writing gigs that spun off from the book deal. But something about that funeral reawakened a deeper sense of purpose in me. People weren't just responding to art, they were responding to connection. I launched something new. I called it the Story Mirror. It wasn't just about portraits anymore. It was about giving people a space to write their own stories. Anonymous, raw, unfiltered. A digital confessional where trauma met transformation. Within a month, it had thousands of entries, and among them, one stood out. He told me I'd never be anything without him. He was wrong. I became more than I ever imagined, but I lost the joy of becoming it alone. It was unsigned, but I recognized the cadence. It was Caroline. The next time we met, it was for coffee. Not reconciliation. She said, "I'm not here to apologize. I still believe you hurt me." I nodded. "And I still believe you never really saw me." She smiled, sad and soft. Maybe we were both right. And that was enough. We didn't become friends. We didn't restart anything. But we did something better. We stopped being each other's villains, and for 2 people once at war, that was a miracle. A few months after the funeral, my life had settled into something I hadn't expected. Rhythm. Not quite peace. Not yet. But something steadier. The toy Story Mirror was growing. I had partnered with 2 nonprofits, one for grief counseling and another supporting divorce recovery. And we were creating a series of reflections events where strangers read each other's anonymous stories aloud in dimly lit rooms. 3. First one was at a converted library downtown. We expected 20 people. 70 showed up. One woman read a piece from someone who had lost a child. The room held its breath. A man read a story about being left at the altar. A teenager read about hating her own reflection. People cried. People hugged. No one knew who wrote what. But somehow, we all felt seen. I started staying after the events just to listen, and that's when I realized something. What I took from Caroline wasn't an object. It wasn't revenge or even closure. It was meaning. She took the house, the car, the curated friends who only stayed loyal to whichever side had a better story. But I took the truth, and now I was giving it back to others. Then, on a rainy Wednesday, in April, I received an envelope in the mail, handwritten, no return address. Inside was a single photograph, one of mine, but I hadn't printed it. It was a shot of Caroline from behind, standing on a cliff near Cannon Beach. Her hair was blowing wildly in the wind. I remembered taking it during one of our last trips. Together. On the back, she had written, "Maybe you were the only one who ever really saw me. No signature, no apology, but also, no resentment." That's when I realized something important. Some stories don't end with reunion or revenge. They end with recognition, and that's enough. But the world had more turns to throw. At one of the Reflections events in Seattle, I noticed a young man sitting by himself, near the back. He didn't speak, didn't read, just listened. After everyone left, he approached me. "You're Daniel, right? Caroline's ex?" My stomach tightened. "Yeah, that's me." He offered a half smile. "I'm Noah, her younger brother." It took me a second. I hadn't seen him since he was in high school. He used to be a lanky kid who always wore headphones and disappeared during family events. Now, he looked sharp, composed, but there was a sadness behind his eyes. "She doesn't know I came," he added quickly. "She wouldn't approve." I nodded, unsure where this was going. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. "I found this. She wrote it a while ago, maybe a year after the divorce. Never gave it to anyone. I don't know why I kept it." He handed it to me. It was a letter. "To Daniel, I wanted to destroy you. I won't lie. When you told me you didn't want the house, I thought it was weakness. When you didn't fight me for the car, I called it cowardice. When you didn't chase our friends or try to win them back, I said you had no pride. But now I see, you were letting go, not of me, of the war. You let me have the world I thought I wanted, only for me to learn it was hollow. And you walked into something bigger, something honest. Maybe I hated you because you forgave me before. I could forgive myself. I won't ask to fix things. I don't think we're meant to be fixed. But if you ever wonder, yes, you mattered. More than anything. See." I sat there for a long time after Noah left. Not because I wanted her back, but because something that heavy, something that vulnerable, deserved to be held and honored. The next morning, I added something new to the story mirror, a section called Letters Never Sent. It exploded. Thousands of people wrote letters to exes, to parents, to their younger selves. Some wrote to abusers, others to people who had passed. A few wrote letters to God, and somewhere in that mosaic of healing I felt lighter. Maybe because I was no longer writing just my story, but holding space for others to write theirs. Months turned to years. I met someone new. Her name was Jess. She was an architect with eyes like sunrise and a laugh that reminded me that hope wasn't extinct. She had scars, too. A divorce, a miscarriage, a brother who hadn't spoken to her in years. But unlike Caroline, Jess didn't hide her pain in perfection. She wore it like a loose cardigan, comfortable, weathered, but still warm. She didn't try to fix me. She just sat beside me while I healed. One evening, Jess and I visited an exhibit featuring the story mirror. It had grown into something I couldn't have imagined. A publisher offered a deal to turn the entries into a series of books. A foundation wanted to sponsor healing retreats. And on one wall, printed in elegant script, was a quote I had once typed in a midnight haze. You don't always get justice, but if you're lucky, you get clarity. Jess read it, then turned to me. Did you write that? I nodded, she smiled. Then I guess you're lucky, and that's how it ends. Not with fireworks or applause, but with a sunrise, a steady heartbeat, and a room full of strangers daring to tell the truth. Caroline took many things, but I took the story, and now I give it away, over and over again. Because the one thing she couldn't replace was the man I became after her. You would think that once the dust settles, once the storms pass, once the heartbreak gives way to healing, you'd feel done. But life doesn't close in neat endings. Sometimes, the past doesn't haunt you, it just lingers, quietly, like a perfume you can't quite name, but recognize instantly. It was 3 years after the divorce when I received an email from someone named Marcy, one of Caroline's former colleagues. She said she had been following the story mirror, that she loved what it had become, and then she added something I wasn't prepared for. I don't know if you've heard. Caroline's sick. She didn't want anyone to tell you. My heart stopped. I stared at the screen, not because I still loved her, but because part of me, some ancient corner of the man I used to be, still carried her name like a scar. I replied politely, asked how bad it was. Marcy didn't mince words. Stage 4, pancreatic. That night I couldn't sleep. I walked through my apartment barefoot, silent, listening to the hum of appliances. Jess was out of town on a project. The city was sleeping, and I sat with a question that felt as heavy as truth itself. Should I go see her? There was no closure I needed, no apology I was chasing, no revenge I still dreamed of, but something deeper had settled in me. Something that whispered, maybe grace doesn't wait to be asked for. Maybe sometimes you offer it anyway. Not because it will change the past, but because it might redeem the present. 3 days later, I stood outside her hospital room. I had rehearsed a dozen versions of this moment. What I'd say, how I'd react, whether she'd throw me out or break down crying. None of that happened. When I walked in, she was sitting up in bed, hair thin and wrapped in a blue scarf, reading a novel she probably wasn't paying attention to. She looked at me for a long second. Then softly, "You look older." I smiled. "You don't." She chuckled, dry, short, but real. "Liar." I sat in the chair by her bed. For a minute, neither of us spoke. The air was thick with everything we weren't saying. Then, she whispered, "Why are you here?" I could have said 100 things, instead I told the truth. "Because I'm not angry anymore." That broke her. Tears welled in her eyes. Not the dramatic kind, the quiet kind. The kind you don't even wipe away because you're too tired to pretend. She turned her face to the window. "I did some terrible things." I nodded. "I did some weak ones." She looked at me. "Do you hate me?" "No," I said. "I don't even think about you like that anymore. You're not the villain in my story, not anymore." She exhaled something that sounded like relief. "Do you ever wonder?" she asked slowly. "If we were just too young? Too proud?" I hesitated. Maybe. But I think we were just two people trying to be loved, without knowing how to love ourselves. She let that sink in. Then she reached into her drawer and pulled out a small leather notebook. "I started writing after you left. Just pieces, thoughts, regrets. You gave me that. The permission to speak my truth. Even if it came too late." She handed it to me. I didn't open it. Not yet. Some things deserve silence first. I visited her 5 more times. We didn't rehash the marriage. We didn't try to fix anything. We just talked. About books. About music. About how life was funny and cruel and strange. She asked about Jess. I told her the truth. That Jess was kind in ways that were unshakable. That she never once made me feel like I had to earn being heard. Caroline smiled. "Sounds like the kind of woman I wish I had become." Trow. Her funeral, I sat in the back. I didn't speak. I didn't approach her family. I didn't bring flowers. But I brought something else. The notebook. A week later, I posted one of her entries on the story Mirror with her name. It read, "Some stories don't have happy endings, but they can still end with dignity." It was shared over 1,000,000 times. One afternoon, Jess and I were walking through a quiet park when she turned to me and said, "You okay?" I nodded. "You've been different," she added. I didn't deny it. "I saw Caroline," I said quietly, "before she passed." Jess stopped walking, looked at me with a softness that made me want to cry. "Did you get what you needed?" "No," I said. "But I gave what I didn't know I had." She nodded, slipping her hand into mine. "That's enough." Later that night, I thought about everything Caroline had taken, and how, in the end, the one thing she couldn't replace was this. I had finally learned how to forgive without needing an apology, and in that quiet, sacred place, I was free. In the months following Caroline's death, I noticed something strange. There were no more nightmares, no flashbacks to the courtroom, no more waking up with that sharp, phantom pain in my chest that used to scream, "You lost everything," because I hadn't. What I thought was everything, the house, the car, the friends, the furniture, even the silence of that big, cold dining room, was never truly mine. It was just rented comfort. The real treasure, I would come to learn, wasn't the things I built with Caroline. It was the truth I reclaimed after her, and that truth came alive in the most unexpected place, a school auditorium. My son Benjamin had been asked to speak at his high school graduation. He hadn't told me until 2 days before. Typical Ben. Humble. Allergic to attention. "Why didn't you tell me earlier?" I asked. He shrugged, adjusting his hoodie. "Didn't think it was a big deal." I smiled. "It is. Want help writing it?" He shook his head. "Already done." That was Ben. Quiet fire. Always preparing in the dark. The day of the graduation. I sat in the third row with Jess beside me. She held my hand tight as Ben walked up to the podium, tall and composed, his speech folded neatly in his grip. He looked out into the crowd and cleared his throat. Then he began. "Most people assume we graduate from school with knowledge. But I think the most important thing we learn isn't a subject, it's how to recover from loss." The room quieted. My parents divorced when I was 10. I don't remember a lot from those days, but I remember the silence, the kind that fills a house with more noise than any fight ever could. My heart froze. Jess looked at me, then back at Ben. "I saw things I didn't understand. I heard people say my father gave up, but he didn't. He chose peace over revenge. He let go so I wouldn't grow up seeing love as a courtroom battle." Tears stung my eyes. "And then he built something new. Not out of anger, not out of guilt, but out of honesty. He taught me that you don't have to win to be whole. You just have to tell the truth, even if it costs you." The audience was still. So today, as I graduate, I don't just thank my teachers or my school. I thank the man who taught me how to fall with dignity and rise again with grace. He paused, then looked directly at me. "Dad, this is your diploma too." I don't remember standing. I don't remember clapping. I only remember Jess's hand squeezing mine and the rush of people turning toward me as if I'd done something extraordinary. But I hadn't. I had simply survived. And in doing so, I had taught my son something no textbook ever could. Later that night after the celebration, Ben and I sat on the porch. The summer air was heavy with June humidity. Fireflies blinked across the lawn. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded. "You blindsided me." He smiled. "Had to. Otherwise, you would have edited it." I laughed. Then he grew serious. "I know I was little when everything happened," he said. "But I remember how you used to sit in the living room alone, just staring at the floor, like you were trying to disappear. I didn't speak. I used to think you were weak. His words landed like bricks, but I let them settle. Now I know you were strong in a way I didn't get back then. He looked at me. You didn't scream. You didn't beg. You just let go. I didn't want to poison you, I whispered. I know, he said. And you didn't. That's why I'm here. That's why I'm whole. That night, as I sat in bed beside Jess, I finally understood the full weight of what I had taken from Caroline. Not a thing, not money, not revenge, but legacy. The ability to pass down truth, to raise a son who didn't inherit bitterness, to love again without carrying the ghosts of a failed marriage. She took the house. She took the car. She even took our shared history. But she couldn't take this. A heart that still believed in healing, and a child who knew what it meant to stand in the light of honesty. Healing is quiet. No one claps for it. There are no trophies, just small moments you don't post online, like brewing 2 cups of coffee in the morning and knowing which one Jess prefers, or finding Ben's old science project in a box and not crying, or waking up one day and realizing you didn't think about the divorce for 72 hours. It's not flashy, but it's real. A year had passed since Benjamin's graduation. Jess and I had moved into a small home just outside of town, a single-story cottage with lemon trees out back and windows that caught the morning light like it was a blessing. We weren't rich, but the air felt different here, like it had permission to rest. I had started teaching again, just 2 nights a week. Philosophy. It felt like returning to a version of myself that Caroline had erased. Jess worked from home. She wrote for a small wellness magazine, and every so often she'd pause to read a paragraph aloud, laughing at her own edits, unconcerned with how imperfect it sounded. It was a life made of quiet peace. But even peace has its tremors. One Saturday, Ben visited for dinner. He was in college now, taller, leaner, more confident. He brought a girl with him named Maya. She was kind, sharp-witted, and had a tattoo of a wave on her wrist. After dinner, as Jess cleared the plates, Ben pulled me aside. She wants to meet my mom. I paused. Caroline? He nodded. There was no anger in his voice, just a truth placed gently on the table. Have you seen her since? No, he said. Not since she moved to Portland. I knew she had left the state, the house, the car. She sold everything. Even the friends she had weaponized against me had grown distant. Caroline had disappeared into a new identity. Ben sipped his drink. I don't know what I expect, but I think I need to close the loop. I nodded. I support you, I said. He looked relieved. But be careful with what you're hoping for. Closure doesn't always come with apologies. He smirked. I'm not looking for apologies. I just want to look her in the eye and see what's left. A week later, he flew out to Portland. Jess and I waited for a text. When it came, it was short. Saw her. We talked. I'm okay. We'll tell you when I get back. I exhaled. When Ben returned, he asked to meet alone. Just the 2 of us. We sat at a park bench under a canopy of pines, our breaths fogging in the cool air. She's different, he said. How so? Not bad, just lighter. Like she doesn't carry any of it anymore. I nodded slowly. She said she regretted how things ended, but not the choices. That landed heavily. She didn't apologize for what she did, only for how it made me feel. A strange way to phrase it, but painfully honest. Classic Caroline. And how did that feel? I asked. He was silent for a while. Freeing, he finally said. Because I stopped expecting her to be who she was. I nodded again, letting the silence stretch. She asked about you, he added. I turned to him. Said you were always more patient than she deserved, that she doesn't hate you, that she just couldn't live in your world. That last part struck me. It was true. I had built a world of introspection, dialogue, slowness. Caroline had needed noise, applause, urgency. We had been 2 different species pretending we were the same. As we stood to leave the park, Ben put his arm around my shoulder. "You know what I realized?" he said. "She may have taken everything visible, but you kept the invisible things." I smiled. "Like what?" "Like me," he said. Later that night, I sat alone on the porch. Jess was asleep. The stars were spread thick above the trees. Opened my old notebook, the one I used to write in before the divorce, back when philosophy was my daily language. On a fresh page I wrote, "She took the house, she took the car, she even took our friends. But I took something she never noticed. The truth of who I am when I'm no longer trying to be who she wanted, and for the first time in years I felt whole. Sometimes the things we lose are exactly what make space for what we truly need." A few weeks after Ben's return, I found a letter in our mailbox. Handwritten. No return address. The handwriting was unmistakable Caroline. Jess noticed the hesitation in my hand as I held the envelope. "You okay?" she asked. I nodded, slowly. "It's from her." Jess didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her silence was a cathedral of understanding. I opened it. "I don't expect you to read this, but if you do, I hope it doesn't sting. Ben is remarkable. I know I can't take credit for that anymore. He's yours in all the ways that matter, and I think that's what I've struggled with all this time. When I took the house, I thought I was winning. I thought the stuff made me strong, but I lost the man who would have forgiven me before I even asked. I don't deserve that grace, but I wanted you to know. I see it now. I'm not asking for anything. I just needed you to hear that. Tell Ben I'm proud of him, and tell Jess, thank you for making you feel safe to be yourself again. No signature, no address, just closure, not the grand kind, not the fireworks and tears kind, but the kind that settles into the corners of your heart and lights a small lamp." I folded the letter and placed it in the back of my journal, not to revisit, just to remember. That evening, Jess and I sat on the porch. She held her tea. I held the stillness. "She wrote to you?" she asked. I nodded. Jess didn't press. After a long pause, I said, "It didn't make me angry." "I'm glad," she whispered. I think I'm finally ready to stop resenting the past." Jess looked at me, not with curiosity, but with peace. That's when you know you've healed, when the story no longer needs a villain. I kissed her hand. In the months that followed, Ben began to visit more often. He and Jess got along wonderfully, and they'd often cook together, arguing over spices and laughing like old friends. One afternoon, Ben asked if he could store some boxes in our attic, things from his dorm he didn't want to toss yet. When I helped him lift the last box, something fell out, a small leather notebook. "Yours?" I asked. He turned red. "Old writings. I was trying to make sense of everything. You know, back then." I picked it up and handed it to him. "Ever think of writing a book?" I asked. He smiled shyly. "Sometimes." "Do it," I said. "Your story matters." That night I watched Jess sleep. A storm rattled the windows gently, but she didn't stir. She looked so at peace, wrapped in the quiet of our life. I walked to my study and opened a fresh document on my laptop. At the top, I typed, "What She Left Behind," by David Walker. And beneath that, I began to write, not just about the divorce or the betrayal, but about rediscovery, about grace, about choosing not to become the worst thing that happened to you. Months later, I published it independently. Small run, modest sales. But one review stood out. It came via email. "Your story felt like mine. I read it in one night, and I finally slept without crying. Thank you for telling the truth." That was all I needed. Years passed. Ben graduated. He got engaged to Maya. Jess and I grew older, grew wiser, grew roots. One day we visited an old bookstore. On the shelf, wedged between bestsellers and forgotten names, was a copy of What She Left Behind. I held it in my hand and smiled. "She took the house," I whispered, But I built a home. Jess looked at me, confused. What? Nothing, I said, pulling her close. Just grateful. Because in the end, she could take the house, the car, and even the friends, but the one thing she couldn't replace was the man I became after she left. You don't notice the exact moment when grief loosens its grip. It's not a bang or a revelation. It's the quiet realization that you no longer look backward when the future calls. It had been over 2 years since the divorce was finalized, but Carolyn's shadow still visited occasionally, not as a storm anymore, but like the echo of rain in a dry season. Ben had just moved into his first apartment with Maya. They invited us over for dinner. Jess brought wine. I brought a toolbox, just in case. It was surreal watching my son open drawers that were finally his, hanging frames with hands I once taught to hold a bat. Maya, gentle and composed, had a way of calming a room without trying. She reminded me of Jess in that way. Dinner was a mess. Pasta overcooked, sauce burnt, but none of it mattered. We laughed. We spilled wine. We ate bread and told stories, and for the first time in years, I watched my son glow with a peace I hadn't seen since before it all fell apart. When Jess and I got home, she kicked off her shoes and said, "You know he's going to be okay, right?" I nodded. "He already is." The next morning, a letter arrived. This time, not from Caroline, but from our old friend group. A wedding invitation. Jack and Denise were finally getting married. After all the dust, all the sides taken and bridges burned, they were coming, together. I stared at the envelope for a long time. Jess, reading the look on my face, asked, "What is it?" "Old ghosts," I said. "Dressed up in white," she smirked. "Are we going?" I don't know. I didn't want to reopen wounds, but something in me felt stronger, curious. We decided to go. The venue was coastal, perched on a cliff, with the sea roaring below like applause. It was beautiful, painfully so. The kind of place Caroline would have chosen. Walking into that space, seeing the faces of people who once sat in our kitchen, toasted our birthdays, held our child. It was like stepping into a parallel life, one I no longer belonged to. But the strangest thing? I didn't feel small. I didn't feel like the man who'd been abandoned, betrayed, or pitied. I felt like a witness to another chapter I had no need to rewrite. During the reception, Caroline was there. Of course she was. She stood near the bar sipping something clear, her eyes catching mine across the room. She didn't look away. Neither did I. And then she smiled. Not the I won kind of smile. Not the bitter kind. But the kind that says, "We're no longer at war." I nodded. That was enough. Later that evening, as the music slowed and the guests began drifting away, I found her sitting, alone under a string of lights. "Mind if I sit?" I asked. She shook her head. Silence. Then she said, "You look good. You look better." We both laughed. "Ben's doing well," she said. "He is. I saw he published a book." "Yep, and he's already writing the next one." She swirled the ice in her glass. "He's more like you than I wanted to admit." I didn't reply. "I was angry for a long time," she continued. "Not at you. At me. For giving up the one person who actually saw me." I breathed in slowly. "We both made choices." "Yeah," she said. "But you made better ones." We didn't talk much after that. Didn't need to. As Jess came to find me, Caroline stood and offered her a soft smile. Jess nodded in return. No daggers, no tension, just life, moving forward. And in that moment, I realized something profound. Forgiveness isn't about letting someone off the hook. It's about cutting the hook out of yourself so you can walk free again. When we got home that night, I wrote in my journal, "Closure doesn't always come wrapped in apologies. Sometimes it comes in the quiet nod between two people who finally grew up." The days that followed the wedding were quieter, not externally. The world went on with its usual chaos. But inside me, Something had settled, like a wound that had finally stopped itching. There was peace now, not because everything had gone the way I wanted, but because I had stopped needing it to. One afternoon, Jess and I were sitting in the sunroom, a room we'd renovated together, floor by floor, wall by wall. She was sketching a new idea for her interior design portfolio, and I was doing a final edit on a piece I'd written for a magazine. "You ever think," she said, pencil pausing, "that none of this would have happened if things hadn't, blown up?" "All the time," I said, and I meant it. If Caroline hadn't left, if the settlement hadn't been brutal, if the house hadn't been taken, if the friendships hadn't been fractured, I wouldn't be sitting in that room with the woman who taught me what love without condition looked like. I wouldn't be watching my son thrive in his writing. I wouldn't have found my voice again, and perhaps most importantly, I wouldn't have learned that the most irreplaceable things in life are the ones you don't buy, earn, or win. You build them, moment by moment, choice by choice. One day, Ben called and asked if he could stop by. He had something to give me. When he arrived, he was holding a leather-bound journal. "I found this," he said, "in one of Mom's boxes. It was my old journal, the one I'd kept during the collapse, the one I thought I had lost in the move." I opened it, and there were my words, raw, messy, unfiltered. Thoughts I hadn't dared speak. Fears I'd hidden even from myself. At the very back, folded and tucked between the last pages, was a note from Caroline. I read this when I shouldn't have. I was looking for ammunition, something I could use. But all I found was truth. Your truth. And it made me realize I'd never really known you. "I'm sorry for what I took. This is yours again." I sat in silence. Ben watched me carefully. "You okay?" I nodded. "I think this is the last piece," he smiled. "Then you can finally close that chapter." I did, literally and symbolically. Later that week, Jess and I took a trip. We didn't plan it. We just got in the car and drove. We ended up at the old cabin we used to visit when we were kids, the one by the lake where time seemed to pause. We walked along the shore barefoot, skipping stones and talking about everything and nothing. At night by the fire, she asked me, "Do you still feel like something was stolen from you?" I thought for a long moment. "No," I said, "because what she took was replaceable. The house, the car, even the friends. What I kept, what I built after. That's what mattered." Jess nodded, her hand finding mine. "You took your integrity," she said, "your dignity, your heart." I smiled. "And the best damn fishing rod, too." She laughed, head thrown back in that way I loved. "You really did." Sometimes I think back to the early days, the courtrooms, the fights, the cold silences, and cruel words. It used to haunt me. Now it humbles me because every scar tells a story, not of weakness, but of healing. And this? This is a story of what's truly irreplaceable, not possessions, not validation, but the peace that comes from surviving what was meant to break you, and choosing every day after to grow from it instead. That's what I took when everything else was stripped away, and no one, not even her, could take that from me. Grief has a funny way of arriving, sometimes loud, sometimes whispering. After the dust of the divorce had long since settled, after the papers were just cold ink on paper, I started noticing something strange. Not pain, not rage, but absence. The kind of emptiness that used to be filled with noise, text messages, shared calendars, inside jokes that only made sense to two people who once thought they'd grow old together. It's not that I wanted Caroline back. I didn't. It's that for a long time, I thought the noise was what made life meaningful, but I was beginning to understand. Peace is quiet, and quiet was where the truth finally spoke. It was early fall, and I was back in the city for a business conference. I wasn't there as an attendee this time. I was on the panel, invited to speak about building back after personal catastrophe. Apparently my article had gone viral. People had seen themselves in the chaos I had lived through. After my talk, a woman approached me. Sharp eyes, kind smile, maybe late 40s. "That story," she said, "was mine too." I asked her what she meant. "My husband took everything," she said, "and I thought I would die from it, but I didn't. And now I'm running a wellness startup, remarried and happier than I ever was." Her voice didn't waver. She wasn't bitter. She was free. And I wondered, for the first time, if I was fully free too. That night in the hotel room, I called Jess. "I don't know if I've let go of everything," I told her. She was quiet for a moment. "You don't have to," she finally said. "You just have to stop letting it weigh you down." That stayed with me, because it's one thing to carry your past like a lesson, and another to drag it like a punishment. Back at home, Ben had started writing again. Not just journaling, but actual stories. He was working on a short film script, one that mirrored our life just enough to sting but not enough to be obvious. When I read his draft, I cried. There, on the page, was a boy who watched his parents rip each other apart, but found a way to believe in love again. In the story, the boy grew up to become a man who stood on stages, telling his truth, and giving others permission to tell theirs. "You wrote." "Me," I said, handing the pages back to Ben. He nodded. "I wrote us." A few weeks later, Caroline emailed me, just a line. "Would you meet me? Just once. For closure." I stared at the message for nearly an hour. Jess was the one who finally said, "If you don't want to go, don't. But if there's still something unsaid, something you need to leave behind, maybe this is the moment." I didn't reply to Caroline right away. I slept on it, prayed on it. And when I woke up the next morning, I replied with one word. Yes. We met at a neutral cafe, not one we used to go to, just a quiet corner place on a Tuesday afternoon. When she walked in, I barely recognized her, not because she looked different, but because she moved differently, softer, smaller, like someone who'd built a cage out of her own victories and was finally realizing she wanted out. She sat down across from me and didn't speak for a while. Then, finally, "You look well." "So do you." Lies, but polite ones. "I wanted to apologize," she began. "I know, it's late, maybe too late." I stayed silent. "I thought winning would make me feel powerful," she continued, "but it just made me feel hollow." She looked down at her hands. "No ring now. I lost you long before the court, but I didn't have the grace to say it." I exhaled, not out of relief, but release. "Thank you," I said. "That means more than you know." She nodded. "I hope you're happy," she said. "I heard about Jess. She sounds like the kind of person I never learned to be." "She's kind," I said, "and honest, even when it's hard." Caroline looked away. "I was never good at that." "You could be," I replied, "if you wanted." We didn't hug, we didn't cry, but when we left, something had shifted. The final thread between us had been cut, not with cruelty, but with grace. And grace, it turns out, is the only real closure there is. Caroline's apology didn't rewrite history. It didn't restore the lost years, the broken friendships, or the nights I spent awake wondering how the person I once loved could hurt me so cleanly. But it did something else. It closed a door I didn't even realize I had left slightly open, not because I was waiting for her return, but because I had never truly let the past become the past. That night I sat with Ben in the backyard. The air was cool, the stars sharp against the dark. "I met with your mom today," I said gently. He didn't flinch. He just nodded. "She said she's sorry." Ben looked up at the sky, searching for something he couldn't name. "I believe she is," he said, "but I don't need her to fix anything anymore." It was strange, hearing that from him. Strange and beautiful. He wasn't asking for a redo. He had grown beyond it. At work, my business continued to thrive, not because of any magical formula, but because I had finally stepped into it with a whole heart. People respond to honesty, and When I stopped hiding behind stoicism and started leading with vulnerability, everything changed. Our clients trusted us more. Our team worked better. Even the numbers, the spreadsheets I used to dread, started to make sense. One day my assistant forwarded me a message. It was from a woman who had heard me speak at the conference weeks earlier. I left my husband the next day. The email read, "Not because you told me to, but because you reminded me that I'm allowed to choose myself." I read it twice, then a third time, and I realized that healing isn't just personal, it's contagious. Jess and I were stronger than ever, but strong didn't mean perfect. There were arguments, usually about the small things, dishes, boundaries, my habit of drifting off mid-conversation when my thoughts ran too loud. But there was something different with her. Arguments didn't feel like threats. They felt like growing pains. When we disagreed, we didn't pull away, we reached, and every time we reached, we found each other. One weekend, we drove out to the lake. Just us. No work, no phones. Ben stayed with a friend, happy to have the house to himself. I sat beside Jess on a wooden dock, legs dangling over the edge, and asked her the question that had been floating in my chest for weeks. "Do you ever think we met at the wrong time?" She smiled. "No," she said. "I think we met at the exact moment you were ready to stop running." I nodded slowly. "Because I had been running," I admitted. Jess took my hand. "And now you're here." Later, that night by the fire, she leaned in and whispered, "I don't care what you lost. I care what you've built." That line, simple but profound, stayed with me. We are not just the sum of our losses. We are the stories we choose to live after them. Back in town, I got a call from an old friend, Daniel, one of the ones who had stayed silent during the divorce. Not siding with Caroline, not with me, just absent. "I've been following your writing," he said. "I owe you an apology. I didn't expect that." He continued. I froze. I thought being neutral was the moral thing. But now I realize silence is just comfort dressed as morality. I swallowed hard. "Thank you," I said. "I'd like to reconnect," he added. "If that's something you're open to." I thought about it, about the long barbecues we used to have, about our kids playing tag on the lawn, about the laughter that once filled our lives. "Yeah," I said. "I think I'd like that. Not every friendship can be restored, but some, the ones built on real roots, just need light again, and forgiveness is a kind of sunlight." The final piece of the story arrived 1 month later. Ben was accepted into a summer program for young filmmakers. He stood in the living room, letter in hand, eyes wide with disbelief. "I got in," he whispered. I pulled him into my arms, holding him longer than usual. "You did it," I said. "You made something out of all of it." He pulled back and looked me in the eyes. "So did you." In the end, Caroline took the house, the car, most of our friends. But I took something she could never replace, myself. Not the shattered version, not the version shaped by someone else's expectations, but the real version, forged in fire, refined by truth, and no longer afraid of the quiet.